This is the Intel Skull Canyon NUC 6i7KYK, and it is 10 years old, which means it's legacy for most people looking to play newer AAA titles. But for many of us who might be looking to, I don't know, put together a little emulation box that we can sit under the TV for cheap, it is perfect. And I've been keeping an eye on this thing for a while, trying to give many of you other options to keep an eye out for, as I've already talked about turning the smaller office mini PC into an emulation box that you can use in the living room. And I want to take a look at this one as well, because I'm also seeing these pop up at pretty affordable rates now, and I think it's finally time to move on one of these and see what it can do. So if you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe if you're new. Now, when this system came out back in 2016, it was actually a beast. Now, it released at $650, but it was a bare bones kit, as in it didn't have RAM or any kind of storage. You had to provide those on your own. But what it did have was a pretty advanced CPU integrated GPU combo from Intel. It had the 6770 HQ. It's an i7, 4 cores, 8 threads, up to 3.5 gigahertz, and it's paired with the Iris Pro 580. That was drawing comparisons at the time to discrete video cards like a 750 Ti, which, hey, for an integrated GPU from Intel, that's actually pretty impressive then, and it still holds up now when it comes to the emulation side. So let's take a look around here. On the front, we have our power button starting on the left, an SD card slot that is actually kind of useful here, 2 USB Type-A ports, a headphone jack, and an IR port. In fact, you can use that IR port to turn the system on if you have a correct remote control. And it even in the BIOS has options to use the Xbox media controller. Remember that thing? Flip it over though. On the back, we do have power in, audio and optical out port, 2 USB-A ports, mini display, Thunderbolt 3, and a full-size HDMI port. Now, you'll notice our power in isn't a standard plug. It does use like a laptop power supply, so you want to make sure if you did not have one that came with it when you bought it, say on eBay, you want to make sure you have the correct one. It's a 120-watt, 19-volt, 6.32 amp adapter. I've seen these pop up online just on their own, usually run about $25 to $30, but I have also seen listings for this Skull Canyon NUC that has the adapter, and the whole thing is $120 to $130 turnkey, by the way. The one that I got here already came with 8 gigabytes of RAM and a 256 gigabyte NVMe inside. And when I opened it up to take a look, and you could open it pretty easily. If it's flipped over on the bottom, there are 4 Phillips head screws in each corner, and then that bottom plate just pops off. And you can see here 2 sticks of RAM, 2 4 gigabyte sticks, which is great because then I can take advantage of dual channel, which is important here for emulation. And then you can also see I have another slot here that's unpopulated, so I can add in another NVMe drive, so I can get a slower one. Doesn't have to be one of the top of the line ones currently. Again, guys, this is from 2016, so it wasn't exactly using some of the the brand new super fast NVMe drive. So you could probably find one that's at least a little bit cheaper if, say, you want to have more storage alongside of your main boot drive. Now, you can easily get to the fan. That's here on the left side. And I would at least look in there to make sure there's no obvious blockage, dust bunnies, debris, anything like that. Unfortunately, getting to the chip itself is a bit more work, and I had to go through and just double check to make sure I was even doing it right, because you have to take the outside plastics off. On the other side, you have a bunch of torque screws all the way around that holds that top plate on. That comes off. And then there are more screws holding the whole thing together. And then you have to sort of pry the board off of the metal plate to then get to the main chip. All right. And the only other reason you'd want to do this is maybe you want to repaste that chip, or if you have to replace the main internal battery here. Otherwise, you just don't have to go this far. There's even antennas that are running around here that you could get in some trouble with. Maybe if you rip at it too much, it could actually rip one of the antenna cables, because this does have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth already built in. I did repaste the chip, and actually you can get a nice little look at it here as I was doing that. And the temperatures are obviously better because I repasted it and it was somewhat dry, but I also ran many tests before I did any of this, and it held up just fine. So you most likely won't have to go this far, and that's about it. My favorite part about this whole thing, though, is it is very small. It's smaller than those mini PCs that I was talking about in a previous video. It's a smaller footprint than the Wii, even, and because it doesn't rely on airflow coming in from the top, you could have it in a smaller area, maybe a smaller shelf or something, as long as you have space around the sides and then the back where it's exhausting air, because it pulls air in through the sides and then it pushes air out the back. It would be perfectly fine and should be able to keep itself cool well enough. So with all that said, how does it perform? Well, I went ahead and loaded up Batocera on the internal NVMe drive and then moved over a bunch of ISOs and games for the main generation that I wanted to test. Spoiler, it works fine with PS1 games and Super Nintendo and Genesis and Neo Geo. Go figure. I'm more interested in that 6th generation where we have to look at something like Dolphin or PCSX2 and maybe push up internal resolution scaling so it looks better on a larger 4K set. See, with this, you can output 4K, so maybe menus or anything like that when you're scrolling through Batocera, it looks very clean. And then when you get into the game, it can still kind of scale to 4K, but a lot of those internal assets and, say, like 3D models will be up-rendered so they look very, very smooth when you're playing, even on a larger, say, 65-inch display. All this means that it will stress the system more so than if you're trying to play it at native resolution, and that's where the i7 6770, but then also that Iris Pro 580 would come in and hopefully get us to that 60 FPS mark. Oh, and I already mentioned this does have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi built in, so because of that, I can sync up this all-black DualSense controller, but you can use really any Bluetooth controller, 8-bit DO or a third-party one or an Xbox controller. And then on the Wi-Fi side, I like having that as more of a convenience. It's a nice to have. So if you, say, put new games onto the system and you want to find cover art easily, it can search and do that, and then it'll populate the front end and look really, really nice. Maybe you do want to attempt to play online with some games, you can, or just like achievement tracking, stuff like that. It's nice to have Wi-Fi available just for the convenience of it, especially if it's maybe in a room that doesn't have a direct Ethernet connection ready to go. I'll also leave a performance box up either on the top left or the top right that will have a bunch of information, but the big one I'm sure you want to keep an eye on is the frame rate, as you will see in real time how exactly it's fluctuating as we're going through these different systems. And so I started with the Dreamcast, and at the Dreamcast, I was just about expecting it to work fine across the board, and it did. So I had this moved up 3x in terms of internal resolution, and the nice thing about the Dreamcast, it already looks very, very sharp when you're playing on like an actual Dreamcast, even on a larger display. If you have a good video out solution, it looks good. This looks great though. The visuals, they look super sharp. And the thing I really like about this time period, this generation, that late 90s, early 2000s, man, it was just so colorful and bright. There's a lot of blues, and there are many games with like a tropical setting. I don't know if that's just because games at that time came through a bit better on those systems with some of the limitations, and that's what they went with, or if it was just a more colorful time, but these games just look really good. So I went between Crazy Taxi, since it's crazy, and you can just crash into things on purpose, go all over the place, try to affect the frame rate. No, it just sat there as a rock solid 60. Even Sonic Adventure 2, which tends to stress these emulators and systems a bit more with the Dreamcast, didn't have any issues there either. Likewise, the GameCube also held up really, really well. I'll load up something like Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3, same situation where it's a very fast-moving game, so you can feel if there are any obvious hiccups, and I didn't have anything there at all. And then I also moved over to Mario Baseball. That one was a little harder to play through the capture card here because there was some timing involved. This game, though, cleans up really well. And I wish Nintendo would do something with Mario Baseball again, because it's still a lot of fun. And I think people would be into it. I think it'd be really, really cool to see what new ideas they could have here with the game, since what the last Mario Baseball was on the Wii. So it's been a bit. I did load up Rogue Leader because that tends to be a game that many people will benchmark emulation systems for GameCube, since it is one of the hardest games to run. and it did pretty well. Here's the thing. When you start the game up for the first time, I noticed it really does struggle, and then over time as shaders are loaded in and it seems to catch up basically. But the opening level is just tough. However, this held up well enough to where by the end of it, I was able to make the trench run at 60 FPS, and yes, was able to blow up the Death Star. After that, I decided to go back into the options, play around with a few settings. I wanted to make sure it did compile all the shaders before the game started. And I also played around with Uber shaders and stuff, but I did get to a position where the game was running at a pretty reasonable 60 FPS at 1080p. I don't know if I'd be able to necessarily play around with some of the high resolution texture packs for this game with this system, but let's face it, Rogue Leader, just at 1080p with some up rendering, looks awesome as it is. And those two systems, I figured no problem would run really well. The PS2 and the original Xbox are systems that I'm still unsure of necessarily. Now, the PS2 has gotten a lot better as we've gone along, and in fact, here, for the most part, it was able to sit at 50 to 60 FPS. The problem game, and it's the one that I think a lot of people benchmark with, is God of War 2, and it was showing here where in the beginning area when I had the resolution bumped up so it was 1080p, and it was sitting in like the 40s and 50s. It was definitely teetering from that 60 FPS mark in that opening area. As you go a bit further in, you don't necessarily have as many of those dips in frame rate, but it does still pop up when some big stuff is happening on screen or there's a lot of enemies. I will say that is kind of an outlier game though, because going around playing a bunch of other titles is no issue at all really with the PS2, even when moving a lot of these games up to that 3x internal resolution and touching 1080p. Midnight Club, by the way, awesome game. Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition, that was on a dual layer PS2 disc. So if you look at the file size, it's 8 gigabytes or something. It's crazy. But man, what a blast from the past. When they drop you in that early 2000s Eclipse model, it's like, man, break out the sidekick. Finally, I did want to look at the original Xbox. And here's the thing. The original Xbox emulation scene is well behind the GameCube or the PS2. And I think a lot of people would look to either of those for any games that are shared across these different platforms as opposed to just going to this Xbox emulator. There are some games, though, that are just on Xbox. So think of something like Jet Set Radio Future, and I decided then to fire it up and see what we have. And like Jet Set Radio, that runs well enough. Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2X, that's another one. Turn off motion blur, by the way, if you decide to fire this game up. It's in the options. It's just the game looks bad with it on. I don't know what the deal is there, but turn that off, and then it runs fine, had no issues at all. But the thing, again, with the Xbox emulation, so I loaded up Halo. It's like, why not? It does this thing where it thinks it's at 60, but then you're playing it, and there's obvious slowdown, and it can't seem to tell with the stat software I have at the top built into Batacera. Can't seem to tell that it's missing frame rate or there's significant drops here. And with Halo, they had a PC version that is probably the one I would end up looking towards instead of emulating it, say, through the Xbox. Okay, I have one bonus system for you. That's the 3DS. And I don't necessarily think about the 3DS on a TV with a controller like this, but emulation has come a long way, and some of these games actually work all right. Now, in terms of the system and it handling 3DS emulation, it does a pretty good job. There is shader stutter that'll happen, and emulation, again, has worked to try to get around this a bit better, but it'll still happen. However, when I was loading up things like Ocarina of Time 3D or Pokemon X, it was able to play them well enough. And so to get around the situation with two screens, you can do different screen orientations. And I found the best one to be where the top screen takes up the majority of the TV's display. And then the bottom screen is kind of a smaller square on the bottom right here. You use the right stick of your controller to control like a little mouse cursor, and that acts like the stylus if you would have to press something on it. And I was able to get through parts of these games without much issue. Pokemon just seems to be more dedicated to the idea of using physical controls and that top screen. So if you want a system that can play, especially like the Pokemon 3DS games, this would probably work fine. And you know what? The 3DS visuals actually work pretty well here when you bump up the resolution, and it does seem to hug 60 frames per second more times than not. You know, looking at this system for the price point that it's coming in at and the capabilities that it has when it comes to plugging in through HDMI to a 4K set, it being turnkey just about out of the box. It's a pretty good setup here for an emulation box, and definitely one to keep an eye on. Let's say you're trying to figure out one maybe for upstairs, or you do want to set one up for the family in the living room. This is a pretty good solution. And I just wanted to once again point this out to you guys, as older technology that you see that people just don't really find uses for, you can still get a lot out of it, especially when it comes to the emulation scene. And it's still fun to do these videos to try to match it up against those older systems that I really enjoy, but being able to see them in a newer light to where the resolution is much better, the frame rate is much better. So let me know what you guys think about this one though down below. And if you want to see more videos like these, let me know in the comments, because I'm always keeping an eye out for different things that we can repurpose when it comes to emulation. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.